as well. Members of the Irish-Canadian Business Association are in the public gallery with Deputy David Stanton. Very welcome. Now, Deputy McNamara.
Thanks very much, Councillor Corla, for the opportunity to speak on this bill. I suppose the Irish-Canadian Business Association will be presented with a view of Ireland which sounds remarkably less corrupt than the view portrayed by Deputy Ring. And I have to say, listening to him, I mean, while one might question why there's been such little change in recent years, it's hard to disagree with him. And I don't mean corruption as regards people taking money that they're not entitled to, but corruption in the use of power, and corruption in particular in stymieing the will of people as expressed through their freely elected representatives. Because the two most powerful people in this chamber undoubtedly are the two people to your right, Minister. And I don't wish to bring too much attention to them. They're civil servants doing their job. But there's a woman who she was a very dedicated public representative. I'll name her. I don't think it's a bad thing to say Patricia McCarthy. She was Mayor of Clare for a long time, long-standing public representative. And I've had a lot of discussions with her of late, and she consistently says, who would want to be an elected representative now? If you want power in Ireland, join the civil service, because that's where power resides. There was a meeting on Monday at Clare County Council about this, proposed by another very long-standing county councillor, Councillor P.J. Kelly. I mean, I think he was elected before I was born. And his political career will possibly and probably last a lot longer than mine will. But he was very critical of you, Minister, I have to say. I don't think this will come as news to you. But the manner in which the Clare County Development Plan was amended by an order or a direction that you gave at the behest of, or at the suggestion at the very least, of an entirely unelected office, the office of the planning regulator. Now, the only legitimacy that our development plans have is that they are a development plan proposed and adopted by the representatives of the people of Clare, in the case of the Clare County Development Plan, Limerick, in the case of the Limerick one, Donegal, wherever. But if they don't even have that legitimacy, then they completely lack any sort of legitimacy. And then we sort of wonder in Ireland, well, why don't we adhere to, why is there such a disregard for planning and development historically and culturally in Ireland? But I mean, if there's no sense of public ownership, public buy-in, public ability to determine what the development plan is, well then, of course, people aren't going to buy into it. And there is a lot of resentment. There's a lot of resentment in communities in Clare, like Carrigaholt, like Doolin, like Spanish Point, which are doing a wonderful job of developing their areas, notwithstanding any lack of support from central or local government. But they can't, there was no proposal to put a sewerage system in place. There's nowhere they can go to even lobby for that. I can raise it in the Dáil, or I can raise any matter to do with Irish water, and I'll be put on to a helpline and I'll speak to Bob. I might as well ring AIR, which is remarkably unhelpful if you ring their helpline as a customer. I mean, ringing Irish Water is the same thing, and there are people across Clare who think that I can get answers for them. I can't. And the county councillors they elected can't get answers, but they'll say, well, talk to the TDs because they'll be able to get the answers. They can't either, because we've taken that beyond local government. There's no accountability for it. They're not accountable to anybody. And we do that with, like, we got rid of the health boards. So there's very, very little power and diminishing amounts of power residing in elected representatives. But that does have a cost, and the price of that is an erosion of respect for democracy. And then you do see reactionary forces that get elected, and then people sit back and they wonder, God, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, it happens when you strip elected representatives of their powers. And I have to say, I agree with Deputy Ring and how he portrayed this cosy club of senior management in local authorities. And how they manage to sit on each other's boards and get elected. And of course, ultimately, they are the representatives of the Department of Local Government in the Customs House. And the Department of Local Government don't rock the boat, and ministers go in there and don't rock the boat, because if they do, they get nothing at all done, as opposed to getting a little bit done and getting out there without too much damage. And that's how Ireland now works. So there is a jadedness and there is a sense of almost betrayal of democracy. And it's a very dangerous thing. Now, turning specifically to this bill, I welcome the creation of a directly elected mayor. I mean, I think that all mayors across local government, whether directly elected or indirectly elected, should have executive powers. But even this mayor, who will be directly elected, will have a mandate, has very few executive powers. Section 10 sets out, refers to Schedule 1, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 refers to a couple of sections of the Local Government Act 2001 with regard to the largely ceremonial powers that this new directly elected mayor will have. And Part 2 refers to all the powers under the Housing Act, the Housing Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1979, 88, 92, 97, 98, Planning and Development Act, Local Government Act 2001, Residential Tenancies Act, Housing Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2009, County Enterprise Boards 2014, Housing Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2014, Affordable Housing Act 2021. Now, why do people elect elected representatives to local government? It's to deal with issues that matter to them. What's the big local government issue of the day? It's housing. What powers will the new directly elected mayor of the people of Limerick have to address the housing needs of Limerick? Diddledy-squat. None. Well, they will have the powers of a councillor, but they will have no executive powers. I give the floor, I think, understanding orders, I can give the floor to the Minister. I'm happy to cede some of my time to him. Oh, yeah, the address. Okay, sorry, I thought you wanted to address me now. So there's very, very little powers in that regard. I mean, other than housing, what are the other big issues of the day? Health, policing. Now, health, the mayor has no powers with regard to any local authority input in health has been removed. Now there's a realisation that maybe this removal of the health boards was a bad idea, and there's going back towards some kind of regional boards. How that will work, and most importantly, who they'll be accountable to, is to be determined. With regard to policing, the new mayor has no policing powers. In fact, the Policing Security and Community Safety Bill 2023, which was brought in, it hasn't been brought in, it's been passed by this House, it's now before the upper House, that even removes the JPCs, the Joint Policing Committees. So, you know, instead of extending power to local government and local government representatives, there's a continuing erosion of that power and a continuing inability of local government representatives to hold the executive to account. And that, as I say, is damaging. It's an erosion of democracy because, you know, housing is the major issue of the day in local government. In Limerick, as it is in many areas, I know Limerick very well. I'm from East Clare. Limerick was where we went on Saturday mornings into Star Discs on Patrick Street. You know, and I've seen how badly served Limerick has been by local government, its own local government, and others over the years, more than any other city, more than any other place I know, compared to Clare, compared to Galway, compared to North Tipperary. I mean, when you look at the destruction of the medieval city of Limerick that you drive through, if you're coming in from Clare, through at Lunkard, what they've done with Nicola Street, or what they haven't done with Nicola Street, built a highway up through medieval Limerick instead of pedestrianising. Now they're pedestrianising Georgian Limerick, which is built to accommodate traffic. It seems nonsensical to me, but maybe they know better. But, you know, with regard to housing, I mean, if you look at, there are no revenue-raising powers or even abilities to propose revenue-raising powers in this. And without that, that's the essence of democracy, taking it. And you have too. I've taken responsibility for decisions I've made, and I've been kicked out. And that's the great thing about being governed by elected representatives. You can kick them out if you want to, and I have been kicked out, and I will be again, I'm sure. But you can't get rid of civil servants. You know, and policies. There's no discernible difference in policies between this government, I have to say, and the last government. Just as there's no discernible difference in policies pre-2019 in Clare, post-2019, because the power remains exactly the same. It resides with the county manager. And that, I think, is a problem, and is causing people to be rightly cynical about it. I mean, I know that 9 million is being given under the URDF fund to tackle dereliction in Limerick. I welcome that. But I mean, there's a huge potential in Limerick, as in many cities, as there is in many large towns right across there, to house people in existing housing stock. But I mean, the Living Cities initiative was developed. I mean, I asked a parliamentary question about it. I mean, the amount of money claimed was paltry in all areas. In Limerick, I think there were just 54 applications in total. There was no breakdown in the amount of monies given out, but it clearly had little impact. I'm not convinced that 9 million euros is going to make the difference that's required in Limerick. I mean, I appreciate that Limerick City and County Council, I don't want to be churlish about the work that civil servants do. They do lots of good work, but they don't have a mandate to determine policy. That rests with people who are elected. Their mandate is to implement policy. And I mean, to the extent that there's been a huge sea change in Limerick, and I welcome that. And I'm not suggesting that the unelected part of Limerick County Council or Clare County Council don't do many good things. I mean, in particular around the use of the Derelict Sites Act. I mean, that is to be commended in Limerick, and it needs to be commended. But even that requires money, huge amounts of money. And if we're to be really serious about it, if we're to really develop it, there has to be a power to raise revenue. So, Minister, I welcome that this bill has finally come about. I note that Brian Ledden, among others, has consistently called for it to be brought about. But I would hope that you will take an open approach at committee stage and not be blinkered by what the Customs House and the unelected powers in this state want. Because everybody wants power. That's the nature of government. And there's always this ongoing tension between elected and unelected representatives. But the people can only get rid of the elected ones. And they deserve to be governed by the elected ones that they can get rid of if they don't like. Because if you continue with a system where you can't get rid of policies that you don't like, attitudes that you don't like, well, then you end up with democratic transition not really being a possibility. And then you have to, well, prepare for the worst. So I would hope that when this goes to committee stage that you will approach it with an open mind. And I would also I have to agree with Deputy Ring about making sure that local authorities are answerable to the Controller and Auditor General. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy McNamara. Members,